Welcome to our fourth week of Technology Dairy Tuesday. I am Betsy Hicks, Regional Dairy Specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension, and I'm happy to welcome you to our fourth week. This week, we are going to be hearing from Harrison Hobart that works for Alltech. Harrison is a graduate of Morehead State University. He currently resides in Marysville, Ohio. He developed a love for agriculture and dairy farming growing up around his uncle's dairy farm and has worked professionally in the ag industry since 2015. Harrison came on board with Alltech on-farm support in January of 2021, serving and supporting customers across the eastern U.S. The focus of his work largely centers around helping to improve and better understand forage quality, feed management, and forage inventory. Today, he'll be speaking to us on utilizing drone technology for feed inventory. So with that, Harrison, I will welcome you and have you bring up your slides. And just a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box that we will be having a Q&A session at the end. And if you have technology issues, put that into the chat box that you'll see at the bottom. We are recording today's session, and the recordings will be available after the end of our final session in the middle of February. So you can expect those by the end of February to be available. So Harrison, are you there? I welcome you to unmute and share slides.
I am, yep.
Great.
Thank you, Betsy.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Very happy to be here. Good afternoon, everybody, and glad to be joining you today. As Betsy said, my name is Harrison Hobart. I do work for Alltech. I've been a member of the on-farm support team here in the Eastern U.S. And as Betsy mentioned, here to talk to you about drones and how we can utilize them to help accurately measure and track forage inventory. So really what I'm hoping to accomplish here today is to give you all kind of a behind the scenes look at the methods that go into calculating forage inventories by utilizing drones, just some of the ins and outs of the software programs, and a little bit of my methodology and what I am putting into my reports. Hope to leave you all with a better understanding of the process and answer any questions that you have along the way. A little bit about myself. Again, Harrison Hobart. I was born in Michigan, raised in Ohio, where I still live today, Central Ohio. It's a move that only causes tension maybe once or twice a year, usually during the college football season. But anyway, my family all comes from the thumb of Michigan. I've got family that still farms and dairies up there. A lot of fond memories as a kid, going up for Christmas and for Thanksgiving and getting to run out in the parlor with Uncle George and my cousin Jason, and I didn't get to do much but stand in the way, but they'd let me push the button for the milker takeoffs and spray the udders down with the iodine wand. And so I mean, that's really where my kind of love for farming and love for dairy in particular really started. So I'm a graduate of Morehead State University. Graduated there in 2015. After graduation, I worked in Northeast Ohio in the field of agronomy for about 5.5 years until I decided I was ready for a bit of a change of pace. Opportunity came along with Alltech, and I hopped on board in January of 2021. So I'm just celebrating 2 years with Alltech as a member of the on-farm support team. Living in Ohio, I primarily cover Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana, but I do also service the Northeast, so New York and New England, as well as the Southeast, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida, in somewhat lesser roles, but as I go, it seems that I'm getting out into those areas a little bit more and more frequently, which I'm not upset about. So I came on board in January. I got my drone license in April, started working with the aerial inventory program, and I think since that point, I've hardly had a week that I haven't had the drone up in the air. So the basis of this program all starts with the software. The software that we use is cloud-based. So what that means is I'm able to access the program through an app on my phone. the phone actually plugs into the controller and it runs the drone when I'm out doing my measurements on the farm. I can also access the program through my laptop, which is where I do all of my measurements and computing after the fact. The program that we use, originally it was designed for the aggregate industry. It was used to measure volume of material, stockpiles through a process called photogrammetry. So in simple terms, that just means we're taking several pictures of an object, in this case, feed pile, at many different angles, and that compounded with the GPS satellite data on each individual picture, we're able to stitch them together and create a 3D model. So the measurements that we can make on that resulting model are highly accurate. Typically, if there is a loader or a mixer tractor, something that's parked in the area that I'm measuring, I can usually in the 3D model zoom in and I can read the model number off the side of the equipment. So it's very neat technology. The company we work with, they claim volume calculations through this modeling to be accurate within 1% to 2% compared to ground-based laser measurements. And I would say, as long as the weather conditions are clear, that is certainly the case. So it gives us a very accurate base from which to start. So the margin for error all comes after that in the calculations. And that's what I hope to get into a little bit today is what else goes into this program after the volume up to and after the volume calculations. So when I'm starting out on a new farm, I'll start a new report. So these are some snapshots off of my application, my app on my phone. I'll set my perimeter around the area that I want to model. I'll select how high I want to fly, and then I'll determine how many pictures I'm going to be taking. So typically, I'll be flying the drone somewhere around 150 to 200 feet in the air, and I'll be taking anywhere from 100 to 300 pictures. Just depends on the size of the feed pad. I think in this case here, this is a local farm to me. I think the flight here takes about 200 pictures. Now, some folks tell me that's overkill. I don't know. I like to err on the side of caution. I never want to have to come back to a farm and have to refly it because I didn't fly, because I didn't take enough pictures, but I haven't yet had an issue with taking too many pictures. So the drone flies, all the pictures that it takes are saved onto an SD card that I'll upload later. And yeah, the drone pretty much flies itself. I set the pattern that it wants to fly, and as soon as the drone's connected and ready to go, it'll go up and it'll fly the route prescribed there in the green. And the only landing I have, the only flying I really have to do is when the drone's coming down to land, I'll guide it back into where I want it, which is make sure it won't hit anything. But that's really it. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. I had a nutritionist riding with me not too long ago that was surprised and I think pretty disappointed that there wasn't a little bit more aerial artistry that has to go into the program. But no, really, that's just about that simple. So typically on farm, these flights are taking anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to complete. There's some challenges that come with flying on the farm, namely the weather. The drone I use, I run a DJI Mavic 2 Pro. The drones are water resistant, but not totally waterproof. So I do get grounded for rain and heavy snow. Snow and heavy fog can also cause some issues with the imagery since it's all based off line of sight. The little model picture I have here kind of in the corner is an example of that. This was a farm I flew in Western New York I wouldn't say it was a snowstorm, but there was some fat snowflakes falling when we were taking it up and flying it. And what happens is that those snowflakes get in the way of the camera. And so on a certain amount of the pictures have snowflakes kind of distorting the view. And so what you end up with is on the pile that's mostly accurate, but then you have some mountains and some pretty deep valleys that are coming out on the modeling. So just something to keep in mind. High winds can be an issue as well. Although the drone is pretty capable. I don't typically recommend this, but I have taken it up in as high as 35-mile-an-hour gusts. It was one of those deals. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in Western Michigan where the wind can really blow heavy. And this was the last farm I had for the day, and I was about ready to be done. So I took it up. As long as you fly the drone kind of across the wind, the drone will balance itself out. It will kind of bank itself into the wind, and that camera gimbal is able to adjust itself. And so all the pictures that were taken were very clear. And I really had no trouble with the modeling. I will say that flying in high speed winds like that will really suck the battery down, but it can be done. So outside of the weather, no fly zones. Something to be aware of: if the dairy is close to a regional or municipal airport, that can be an issue. I don't run across military bases, but I have some colleagues out west that run into that a fair amount. Flying in those areas, if they're not totally restricted, you just need to get prior clearance before you go up and fly in those areas, which sounds difficult, but really it's not that bad. Pretty much you just need to get a text code, and then you're good to fly in a 30-minute window from when you get that code, and so you can get up, do your business, and get out. Birds, they're not usually an issue, but often a concern. They did have an incident last March. I was standing out there with the two owners, the herdsman and the nutritionist, and they had a big flock of birds that was flying out of the commodity shed. And just as I had got done telling them that I've never had an issue with the bird, one of the pigeons just flew right into the drone, smacked it, and expired. It didn't make it. It killed the bird right away, and it dropped right to the ground. And I thought the drone was going to come down, but it didn't. Thank the Lord. Spun about 360 degrees and kept right on going. Brought it down. Replaced a couple propellers that had some hairline cracks in them, and other than that, the drone was pretty unscathed. So really a pretty sturdy machine. I'm really impressed with it. So outside of the drone flights, the flights and the modeling is what I use to take care of the volume calculations. But in order to calculate tonnages, I need to know densities of the pile, and I need to know moisture, dry matter numbers. I know some individuals that will just use book values for density, but in my opinion, unless that farm has a really good handle on their packing density numbers, it's just a shot in the dark. I've measured average density in corn silage drive over piles in the last 2 years as low as 12 pounds and as high as 24. And that's dry matter per cubic foot. If I had put an average density value of 16 on either one of those piles, my tonnage estimates would have been off by quite a bit. A phrase I like from my agronomy days is "don't guess, test." But I'll throw the caveat when it's safe to do so, of course. So I do pull core samples to test for density. Certainly there's some hazards that come with that, but so far I have not found a more reliable way to check pile density. I think it's something that will have to change in the future. I think it's something that will change with some of this scanning and LiDAR technology that's coming out. Although I've only heard talk about it, and I haven't actually seen any of that put into practice so far. So for now, I'm just sticking with my core samples. Just to put some numbers to it as a comparison, this farm is a farm that I've worked with now for the last couple of seasons. They are very particular about packing silage, and it shows. Average densities on their corn silage pile are very consistently 19 to 20 pounds. So using the same volume and dry matter measurements and just assigning a different density value, the measured value on this date was 19.64 pounds. And if I would just assign a 16-pound density to that, That shows a difference of 2,335.09 as fed tons. So we would be underreporting those numbers by about 19%, just by using book values. And that's why I think it really pays in the grand scheme of this program to be checking those numbers. At least have a good idea of the density of the piles that you're working with. So of course I need to talk about safety. Safety needs to be the number one concern when approaching any pile face, especially if you're pulling core samples, you're getting right up against that face. These are just a couple pictures that I've taken while I'm on farm. You got to be aware of your surroundings, and you can't be afraid to just walk away. There's been several instances where, I've just walked away from piles. I might use some old numbers, might use a book value, and that's just what you have to do. In both of these cases, this is where old crop and new crop are butting up against each other. And you can see in that picture on the right, that crack, that fissure that's forming. And that, I think a couple days later, it did end up totally peeling off and falling over, but you never know. You never know when that's going to happen. So there's my safety talk. So once I have the cores pulled, I'll weigh each one and I'll check the dry matter individually. When I was first getting started, I was running a couple Koster moisture testers, and it quickly become a little bit too time consuming just for the number of flights that I was doing. I now use a unit to check dry matters. It's the NIR for farm, purchased from Dairy One. Now it does a lot more than just check dry matters, which is a big reason behind why we purchased it. But I was also looking at tools like the SIO cup. I think those are some units that work very well for getting quick and accurate dry matter measurements. The reason I test each one individually instead of going with just the pile dry matter average is just to dial that accuracy in another notch, just to get that as close as we can. Especially what I've noticed in haylage piles, where we have several cuttings piled on top of each other. I know of some that first through fourth cutting all stacked together in a 15-foot wide, 10-foot tall pile. There was dry matters anywhere from 25 to 55. So that's just how I do it. Just trying to get that as accurate as possible. So once the on-farm portion is complete, then it's heading to the office for the really fun bit. That is when I will upload all the pictures, start getting into the 3D modeling, and that's when I'll start doing my measurements and my drone calculations. So here to the left, I've got a couple screenshots from some reports that I've done. So all I need to do once I have those pictures uploaded and the 3D model is generated, I'll select the volume function, and then in the program, I'm able to go in, zoom in, and set points around the base of the pile. And in this case, in the drive over pile, I just set my points around the outside. The program kind of takes care of the base. It takes an average height of all of those points and sets the base to the pile. And so once I have that, I've got the volume, and it's just about that simple and easy. And sometimes it's not that simple and easy. When we start getting into things like closed-ended bunkers, overhangs, sloping dirt walls, overlapping piles, unclear pile edges, things can start to get a little iffy, and that's really where a lot of that margin of error starts coming into the measurement side of things. Drive over piles are pretty simple. Closed edges bunkers. What I'm able to do in the modeling there in that picture down on the bottom, I can just pick a height and set a flat base to that pile. But what I want to know is I want to know the slope of that bunk floor, so I can calculate a ramp based off that percentage to take off from the total amount, whether it's a 0.5% or a full percent or 2% slope. Take that out from the total volume calculation. Overhangs can get kind of tricky. Again, this is a line of sight technology. And so sometimes roof lines, tree lines, things that are hanging over the piles can cause some issues in the imaging. Things can get a little bit muddy and not quite as clear. Sloping dirt walls and overlapping piles. In a couple of these examples here to the right-hand side, like on a sloping pile, when I'm dealing with the edge of a pile, I got to deal in straight lines. I can't contour that in any way. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of splitting the difference more or less, and just trying to estimate so that some of the dirt or other forage that's included in the measurement is about equal to the amount that I am excluding from that measurement. So once the volume number is figured out, I'll plug it into my report, and then I'll use those volume numbers along with the pile densities and dry matters in order to calculate dry matter and as-fed tons then for each pile. So this is a sample report that I've put together, but this is what I would be sending back to you, the nutritionist and the farm. I've got on the initial page all the piles measured and broken down individually, and then broken down again by feed type. And then I've also got a page for every individual pile that's measured. I've got values, all the values that I pulled on that day when I did do the measurements, the density, dry matter, volume. I do test core temperatures as well. I do run around with an infrared camera as well, certainly in the warmer months, just checking for pile heating, those kind of things. Within this report, there's also a calculator on here that we can use if we're dealing with some piles that have a significant amount of spoilage over the top. We can make kind of a surface area calculation and estimate how many tons of feed in this pile are spoiled, and we can put that into a percent. So if you want to know, really, this is how many tons of good feed that we have available to feed, we can certainly do that too. And there you have it. That's kind of the long and short of what goes into my inventory reporting. Coming on board with the drone, I like to kind of see where else it can be used. It doesn't necessarily stop at measuring inventory. I have used this program to help map and plan feed pad expansions. So the mapping software is able to show elevation changes, and so we can kind of determine maybe the best route to go, with the least amount of fill or least amount of groundwork that has to be done to expand that feed pad. And then it just helps the farm visualize what that's going to look like. And then with the figuring up some pile capacity estimates, kind of leave a plan for how we move ahead with piling feed along with that feed pad expansion. So I've also used this software to help track dry matter loss and shrink. So how I've done that for farms is I'll fly the pile when it's fresh, and then I'll come back again once that pile's been fed out for a little bit. I can track in the two reports how much volume has been removed, and then when I put those numbers up against the feed usage numbers, we can estimate kind of what percent loss we had from either fermentation loss or just from shrink. I had done this somewhat recently for a farm that was transitioning from bags into a corn silage pile, a drive over pile, and so they wanted to get a good handle on what kind of spoilage numbers they were getting, and we were able to see, I think, that we saved a fair bit of feed in moving to the drive over pile. that same sort of measurement can also be done to back figure an average density number. So if we've got a pile where we can't go and pull the density from the face, if we've got the ability to come back and fly it at 2 different times, we can calculate how much volume was taken away. And if we've got a good handle on how much that was fed, we can figure that back with the dry matter numbers, and we can estimate an average value of density for that pile. I've also started utilizing the drone a bit in some feed audits, some TMR audits, that sort of thing. Can give you a bird's eye perspective of the mixer in action, looking at loading position, and it really gets to highlight kind of where the dead spots might be in a mixer. And I think it's just a tremendous thing. I'm a very visual guy myself, and I really enjoy being able to get the drone up there and provide that kind of information for our customers. So back to the inventory program a little bit here. The main question I always get asked is, how accurate are these numbers? And unfortunately, I can't always give you a straight answer, because it really is on a case-by-case basis. The answer is we can get very close. I mean, this mapping technology is very dialed in, but it all depends on a lot of the things that I mentioned previously as to how accurate those numbers are going to be. How is the feed laid out? How clearly defined are the piles? How consistent are the piles, even in terms of dry matter and in terms of packing density? How far is the face into the pile where I can pull a core sample for density? So these are all some factors that can affect our total tonnage numbers in the end. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but I have been able to get as close as within a day of feed out on a few operations. That's always what I'm shooting for, but it's just not always going to be the case. Typically, I feel very comfortable saying I'll get you within 2 weeks of when that feed's going to be fed out. And yeah, I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter if we're feeding 100 cows or 10,000 cows. Nobody wants to run out of feed. So as far as program utilization goes, I typically have customers that I work with on the inventory program setup for either an annual visit, biannual, all the way up to once a quarter. It really just depends on the size of the customer and the need of the farm. This program allows us to get a snapshot of what's available right there that day. And then from there, it's up to the nutritionist and the farm to figure out how to best utilize that as they see fit. Just a shameless plug for our on-farm support team. The aerial inventory program is just a part of what we do. We've got a team of specialists all across the United States, here in the East and in the Midwest and out West, that consult on a number of different facets: forage quality, herd analytics, talent development, cow comfort. And I will say this too, even outside of our on-farm support team, there's a number of individuals that we have here at Alltech that provide that same level of expertise and on-farm service. I know those of you that work that live in New York, I'm sure you know John Winchell and the value that he provides on farm, and I really do enjoy getting out there into your neck of the woods and working with him. Yeah, we'd be happy to work with you, help you work through any issues that you may have. This concludes my presentation. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. If you'd like to get a hold of me, feel free to contact me. My contact information is right there, or get a hold of your local Alltech representative.
Thanks so much, Harrison. I really appreciate your presentation about giving the basics to this forage inventory and drone utilization topic. It's something we see more and more in our area, and we're happy to have you come and talk to us about it. So at this point, if anybody has questions, I see a few are coming into the Q&A. If you have questions, go ahead and put them into the Q&A box. I'll give you a minute to do that. And Harrison, I'm going to show one more slide.
You bet.
So I'll have you stop sharing.
Oh, yes. Let me.
I'll share my slide quickly. There we go. Great. Oh, I'm doing well. We can see it that way anyway. Excuse me. It's not my first day, but these things happen. Anyways. Oh my word. Of course this happens. There we go. All right. So this is, like I said at the beginning, this is the fourth of our series, and we have talked on some other great topics so far. Next week, we are looking forward to having Jeff Bewley come speak to our group on looking ahead, dairy technologies of the future. Jeff Bewley works for Holstein USA and is a great supporter. So we're looking forward to that. And Dave, you're there. I want to welcome Dave Belbian to the stage. Dave's going to work us through some of the Q&A. So I see there's a bunch in there, and we're glad to have you. Thanks again, Harrison.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Betsy and Harrison. So we do have a few questions here. The first one is, have lenders and financial advisors been interested in this approach to better determine year-end values for feed on hand or feed inventory?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've a number of the customers that I work with are taking these numbers to the bank and using them and using these to determine, using this program to determine how much they've got available in stock. So yes, absolutely. Even on with a couple of farm sales and transfers, I've done some measurements, and that has determined how they value that silage ultimately with the sale of the farm even.
Okay, very good. The next question, what is the average price of drone? I'm sure that varies wildly depending on the drone itself, but give it a shot.
You bet. Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, it definitely varies on the drone. I'll tell you mine. What I paid for mine was about $3,000, and that was all in. That was the drone, the controller, 4 batteries, extra propellers, a carrying case, and a battery charging bank. I think in the grand scheme of things, not a terrible amount of money for as often as it's getting used, at least for me.
Okay. All right, the next question. Thank you for the interesting presentation. Can drones be used for monitoring the health of animals on farms? Is this something that Alltech's looking for? Are you aware of any research done in this area?
I know of some research in not so much in drones, but in in cameras in the barn monitoring cow behavior and using them to help monitor cow stress. Not so much on the drone side of things. I don't really get into that side of things. I will use some time-lapse cameras and things in the barns just to help monitoring feed delivery and push-up schedules, that sort of thing. But as far as I know, yeah, I don't know of anybody using drones to monitor cow health or cow behavior.
Yeah, I would think that'd be difficult. All right, the next,
they usually run away when you get
yeah, right.
I did round up a loose heifer one day when I was on farm. It was a real small bodied heifer. She slid out from under the neck rail and was out grazing in the yard, and the farmer was standing right there next to me, and I says, "Hey, watch this." I said, "I bet you I can get her back in the barn." So I went and buzzed over top of her, and I kind of flew in on the far side, and as soon as I started kind of nudging her way, boy, she turned tail and she just ran right up the driveway, right up into the barn, and scurried back underneath the neck rail and right back in the pen she went. So
wow, interesting.
yeah. So there may be some opportunities in that respect.
Yeah. Okay, the next one. What about measuring pasture? Is this possible?
Measuring pasture. I don't know with the technology that we have. I don't know if it would be possible. I mean, I'm sure it would be possible, but with the program that I have as it sits right now, it wouldn't be possible for me to measure pasture. I mean, volume, yes, but if you want to know how much tonnage you have out there in the pasture, I don't. This program would not be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's something that's coming down the road in the future.
Right.
Okay, the next one. Are there any alternative softwares to the expensive drone deploy?
Ah, there, I, I think there certainly are out there. I have heard of some, and I have heard of some guys using some, I won't say homemade software, but a pretty stripped down version of a drone deploys type software. So yes, there are certainly options out there that I think can work very well.
Okay. The next one is, what does this service cost?
So in this case, I mean, with the on-farm support at Alltech, we're not charging for the services. Our service is based off of products used. I mean, this is the value that we're adding onto the farms, our expertise and our availability. If you were to charge for this, I would anticipate looking at anywhere from $500 to $1,000 maybe for an inventory measurement. That's the ballpark I would give you, as my understanding is.
All righty. The next one. Do you do any work to map out fencing or layout for buildings and paddocks?
Not so much on buildings or paddocks, while I certainly could. But most of my mapping in that respect has been on feed pad expansion. You certainly could with this map. I mean, I've got some friends of mine from high school even that are using this in the same technology in construction, and he works for a construction company, and they use it to help design layouts for new subdivisions and roads and houses and lots. So yeah, it absolutely can be used in that respect.
Okay. All right, plugging right along here. The next one, can you elaborate further on your shrink versus loss fermentation comment? How are you separating or measuring the two with the drone pictures?
You bet. So in this case, all I'm measuring is dry. I mean, it is both. I don't know if there's a way to totally separate out the two. What is fermentation? What is dry matter loss, and then what is just wastage? In this particular case, they just wanted to see how much they were able to retain. And so really all I'm doing is I'm measuring the pile when it's fresh and just freshly covered. So I've got it as big as that pile is going to be. And then I came back a couple months later when the pile had fermented and they had started feeding it out. And then I was able to get an average density number. And then I was able to use that. I can in the reporting, I can see what amount of volume has been removed. And then when I put that average density and the average dry matter value to that volume, I can calculate the tonnage of feed that was removed. But it also includes the shrinkage of the pile as well, because it was a new volume calculation on the pile. And so both of those were lumped in on that calculation. And so I just put those total numbers back against the feed usage, and then that's how I was able to calculate my dry matter and my shrink. So,
okay,
I hope that makes sense.
The last one we have so far. There might be more coming in. This question is tangent to your presentation, but how do feeders manage the old crop, new crop interface present in drive over piles? I don't know if that's a question pertaining to you really, but there it is.
Right. Well, you kind of feed through it. I mean, really that's kind of how it is. I mean, always, I mean, if feed's spoiled, there's got to be a zero tolerance policy for feed and spoiled feed. So that's often what happens. I think when we come across those where that pile's buttoned up together, you feed up to, you feed the good feed, and then everything that's kind of spoiled or kind of trashy feed, you got to get removed. And so really that's how you're doing it. I would say, in some of these cases on these really tall piles, carefully is how you would approach that joint.
So I've got a question for you.
You bet.
We're talking about technology on dairies, and we have many of our larger dairies are using a program such as FeedWatch or some other competitive program with their mixer wagon. For farms that are really using that technology very closely and keeping track of how much feed is removed. Anyway, how close has their numbers come to, the inventory that you actually calculated? In other words, and maybe you answered this kind of a little bit at the beginning, but.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I certainly get into a lot of those situations too, where, the farm's got a very good handle on what they're feeding and what they're bringing in, scaling everything in. Yeah. And typically those numbers are coming in very close. Especially on these larger dairies where we're dealing with drive over piles, and so there's not a lot of there's really not a lot of variability, and so it's a pretty straightforward measurement. This where the farms are very good at tracking inventory and tracking the numbers that they do have. By and large, the numbers that I'm coming back with usually help support the numbers that they already have there on farm.
Okay. All right. So another question has come in. There is a consistent argument over fermentation shrink loss. Some say 10%. Have you been able to validate this argument, measure a fresh pile and measure again after fermentation before feed out starts? And I know you spoke to that a little bit, but I don't know how many you've done that way.
Yep.
Could actually determine what the shrink is.
Yep.
Fermentation loss.
Yeah. So in that case, I have actually not done that. Where, totally. I totally get what you're saying. A totally fresh pile to get a volume number, and then after it's fermented, measure it again. I would be interested in trying that, but unfortunately, no, I have not done that yet. But yeah, it certainly does. I mean, I think there certainly is a dry matter loss value. I'd be curious to see. I mean,
and we know that those can vary significantly depending on how the farm is measuring things.
Absolutely.
Or managing things rather.
Absolutely. And packing density is really the number one, really the number one way I see that to really minimize that loss as much as we can.
So one of the things that we forgot to do, and Betsy mentioned it to me, is to thank our sponsors. Without our sponsors, we would not have been able to bring you all of these programs and the ones that are coming up here in the future. So please do business with those businesses. They support us, they support you, and they do a great job for the industry. So Betsy, are you still there? Do you have any other closing comments?
I am here. I just want to thank Harrison again for joining us and thank our sponsors. And we look forward to seeing you all again next week, February 7th, for Jeff Bewley's presentation. And same web link, same Zoom link. We will see you then. Thanks, everybody.